What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Week 15 waiver wire ads. It is the second round of the playoffs for most of you. I guess some people playoffs start this week. But if you're like me, you probably only need this video for the quarterback and defense streamers. But of course, we're still going to go over all the other positions just in case you need to look at some of those. Remember, I always put the timestamps in the description and as a pinned comment. So if you are just here for a certain position, you can just look at that and go to that section. Don't have to watch the whole thing. Before we start, remember what I said a few weeks ago about handcuffs. If you have bench players that you know you won't be using, because realistically, just look ahead a few weeks. There's not that much left in the season. If you know a player on your bench you're not going to be starting, then I would rather use that spot to handcuff one of your stud running backs. You don't really handcuff wide receivers. If you've got a stud running back, I would make sure you have the handcuff just in case something terrible happens. So let's start things off like always with the running back position. And first up this week, we've got Raheem Mostert. And I talked about adding him in deeper leagues last week, and I think it's basically the same this week, although I feel more comfortable adding him in all league sizes now, just not necessarily starting him. I haven't gone through the rankings yet for week 15 because it's only Monday right now as I'm recording this, but I don't know if he's going to be anything more than a flex. We saw Breida active this past week, and so the snaps were split 39 for Mostert, 12 for Breida, and 10 for Coleman, and then the touch split was 12 for Mostert, 7 for Breida, and just 3 for Coleman. So moving forward, I expect Breida and Mostert to be closer to 50-50 because Breida was still coming off of injury. He's still been fantastic basically every time he's not injured. So I would still expect both of those guys to be splitting the touches, and it looks like Mostert has passed Coleman to finish off the season on the depth chart, so I don't really think you can be trusting Coleman anymore. So if you are a Coleman owner and you want the backup, you want the guy that's starting now, then Mostert's a guy you should probably be adding. Again, I haven't made the rankings yet for this coming week. I would guess that he's going to be a flex option, but again, I'll let you know in tomorrow's video. The forever young Adrian Peterson is also an option. Unfortunately, it looks like Darius Geis suffered a knee injury on Sunday. Pro Football Doc doesn't think it's a major injury, but you should add Peterson in the off chance that Geis is forced to miss some time. He isn't involved in the receiving game, but he did have 20 carries on Sunday, and he'll get all the goal line work, so he should be owned in more than 44% of leagues. Patrick Laird also needs to be owned in more leagues. With Balaj done for the season, it looks like Laird is the top back in Miami. He has 8 receptions over the last 2 weeks, and he had 19 touches on over 80% of the snaps this last week, and he faces the Giants and the Bengals in the next 2 games. That's really it for running backs besides any handcuffs that you need, of course. For wide receiver, we'll start off with A.J. Brown. You guys know he was one of my 2 favorite receivers coming out of this draft class, and I've definitely mentioned him a few times on the waiver wire as a guy you should be looking at to add if you need an extra wide receiver. So this isn't just a reaction to his monster game. He is a really good wide receiver. And Tannehill is clearly producing for the Titans, so we could very well see them in the playoffs over the Texans. Brown is dominating the air yards in this offense, and he gets 2 home matchups with Houston and New Orleans coming up. Those are not easy matchups or anything. You know, it's not like he's playing the Giants and the Cardinals coming up, but there are clearly games where the Titans are going to have to put up points. And while I'm not 100% sure you can trust starting him, I definitely don't think he would be a bad play if you needed to use him in the flex moving forward. No one ever wants to add Zach Pascal, but he's always been good when T.Y.'s been out, and it's very possible T.Y. misses the remainder of the season. We don't know yet, and it's possible also that T.Y. comes back this week. It said week to week. We're definitely going to know more in the coming days, but if T.Y. misses again, then we've got a potential shootout with New Orleans next week, and obviously you're not starting Pascal if T.Y.'s in, but if T.Y.'s out again, and they've got other injuries to the position, and they're going to need to score points, then he's not a bad option. Deebo Samuel is also worth an add. Since week 8, he has 14, 8, 19, 21, 13, 14, and 16 fantasy points. Obviously, some of those games were without Emmanuel Sanders and without George Kittle, but he's still involved even with Sanders and Kittle back, and they play the Falcons next week, a game that could shoot out. People also refuse to add Anthony Miller for some reason. We loved his talent coming out of college, and he's finally being used in the offense like he should be. Sure, Trubisky is extremely unpredictable, but he's averaging over 9 targets a game over this past month, and he gets 2 potential shootouts over the next 2 weeks with games in Lambeau and then home versus Kansas City. The last wide receivers we'll talk about are Allen Hurns and Isaiah Ford. Both Devontae Parker and Albert Wilson suffered concussions on Sunday, and if they both miss, then Hurns and Ford are going to need to be used against the Giants. I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about Isaiah Ford. He was a 7th round pick last year. He's got a really early breakout age, but some pretty underwhelming athletic metrics, and he's definitely not a big guy. Then everyone, of course, who plays fantasy knows who Allen Hurns is from his days in Jacksonville. This week, Hurns had 8 targets and Ford had 9. A 7 to 10 target range feels pretty good for these two. Obviously, we can't know what they're going to change going into a week if they know they don't have Parker and Wilson, because we often see splits a little bit different. The game players get injured because they just throw in the backup for the exact same role. They don't have time to switch up a game plan. So we could see either Hurns or Ford get a boost this next week when they have time to prepare. But realistically, you're only picking these guys up if you're trying to find someone who's going to get you into that like 4 to 7 reception range, and it's only as a flex, probably only in deeper formats. For tight ends, we've got a few options as always, and a side note on that, this has actually been a really good season for streaming tight ends. Almost every week, there have been options on free agency, and maybe it's just luck, but a lot of those times, these options have been working out. And this week, it's really not all that different. The top option is Ian Thomas, assuming that Greg Olsen remains out with his concussion. Thomas has produced every time he's been given the chance over his career, and he gets one of the best possible matchups against Seattle this coming week. Tyler Higbee also needs to be owned in far more leagues than he is. Granted, he's gone off in 2 of the best possible matchups for a tight end, but I've said he's a tight end 1 while Everett is out, and yet he is still available in the vast majority of leagues. Jacob Hollister is also out there in a ton of leagues, and he might actually be dropped after a few poor performances lately. But for those of you who are looking ahead, maybe you've got an option this week and you want someone on your bench for next week, well, he plays the Cardinals championship weekend, and if you just follow the flow chart, you will be successful. On to quarterback, where there are a few options, but not as many as usual. Even though the pass attempts aren't there, I'll be sticking with Ryan Tannehill against Houston. He did great for me this week, and Houston isn't exactly a pass defense to fear. It's also worth noting that he's owned in just 2% more leagues than Matthew Stafford, which doesn't mean anything, but I thought it was pretty funny seeing how Tannehill has averaged 22 fantasy points per game since week 7, which, if you extrapolated that over the full season, would make him the quarterback 3. You can also stream Jimmy Garoppolo versus the Falcons. Despite popular belief, Atlanta isn't a defense that you can just run all over. They used to be, but they aren't anymore. That doesn't mean the 49ers can't or won't, because they certainly can, but this sets up well for the 49ers passing attack, and we've seen Garoppolo's ceiling over the past month. Baker at Arizona is another option. Obviously, he has not been good this season, but if there's one thing that can fix it, it's a trip to Arizona. And then if all of those guys are taken and you really need someone to stream, then why not go down with old man Fitz? The dude is out there trucking defenders without a care in the world, and he's got basically no one to throw to at this point, but they're at the Giants, so you don't need to be all that good to get open against them. For defense, the top option is the Titans versus the Texans. No, it doesn't feel great playing a defense against Watson, but you always want to get a home defense that's favored playing a bad offensive line. And while the spread hasn't been released as I'm recording this, I expect the Titans to be home favorites in this one. And the Titans are a low-key, really solid defense. Plus, they're ranked 6th on the season in fantasy points, yet they're available in about 70% of leagues. I'm sure a lot of you picked up the Packers this past week, and if you did, then you can use them again. I like the Titans more, but the Packers should also be home favorites, and they get a matchup with Trubisky, who's been better as of late, but he's still not good, and the Packers do have PFF's 6th rated pass rush. Other than that, the waiver wire is a bit thin on defense this week. You could play the Browns at Arizona. You could play the Eagles at Washington if they're available, although they probably aren't. Or you could play the Chiefs in a home matchup with Denver. But other than those, you're really not looking at too great of streaming options. So let's order everyone for waiver priority. So the order for claiming players is your quarterback streamer if you need one, then your defense streamer. I know those aren't usually towards the top of the list, but they're the most important ones at this point in the season. Then if you need tight ends, one of those that you prefer would be next. Then Anthony Miller, Zach Pascal, Raheem Mostert, Adrian Peterson, Patrick Laird, A.J. Brown, the Miami wide receivers, and then Deebo Samuel. So that'll do it for the Week 15 waiver wire video. As always, if somebody gets hurt in this Monday night game, the recording is done by then, so I'll just have to post a pinned comment that has any sort of update. I'll be doing starts and sits for the running back position tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. But that's the end of this one. I hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And if you're new here, how about subscribing to the channel? But thanks for watching.